Hi everyone. I think we're going to get going now. So good evening and welcome to our latest OC Creatives event, which is called From Concept to Cinema. My name is Charlotte Holtum. I left in Highgate in 2013. I was in Kingsgate. Don't know if there's any other Kingsgates out there. And since then I've been working in factual film and television production. But today we are talking to some people who are far more accomplished than I am. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from two film industry professionals. We've got Zygi and Hazel, who have an insight into the entire film process, but from two very different standpoints. So Zygi Kamasa's first company was Redbus Films, and was known for British classics like Bend It Like Beckham. And Zygi spent the last 15 years as CEO of Lionsgate UK and Europe, where he oversaw the production and distribution of massive blockbusters such as La La Land and the Hunger Games trilogy. He's recently joined forces with Matthew Vaughan as Group CEO of Marv Productions, and we can't wait to hear about the range of experiences he must have had through his extensive career. Also with us today, we have Hazel McKibbin, who is based in New York. She is an up-and-comer in the independent film world and is tackling challenging topics through her art. Her short film Double Speak has received amazing recognition and premiered this year at the Sundance Film Festival, which for a debut film is pretty incredible. So the structure of this evening is I'm going to be asking some questions, but if you as the audience have anything you'd like to ask, if you wouldn't mind chucking it in the Q&A box and we'll come to your questions at the end. So to get going, it'd be really great if we could get an introduction from our interviewees. Hazel, I don't know if you're there and can hear me, but if you would like to go first, that'd be great.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me. I left Highgate in 2011 and I was in Southgate.
Lovely. And a quick little bit about just a little summary of what you're doing and stuff, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, for sure. So since leaving school, I moved towards editing, film editing, and then made my way onto the directing side. Currently doing my MFA at Columbia University, where I'm it's in screenwriting and directing, and my film that I made at school just premiered at Sundance, and sort of is all kicking off from there, I guess.
So exciting. We'll come back and ask you so many more questions about it in just a second. Zygi, would you mind giving us a quick intro to yourself as well?
Of course, thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, of course. Evening, everyone. My name is Zygi Kamasa. I left Highgate in 1987. I was in Queensgate. And Charlotte, I think you summarised my career in the film industry relatively well. At the moment, I'm working. I partnered last summer with Matthew Vaughan. If you don't know, is an acclaimed sort of producer and filmmaker. He's director of films like Kingsman, Layer Cake, and Rocket Man as a producer. And we are currently filming a film at the moment in the middle of a lockdown in Scotland called Tetris with Taron Egerton.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm definitely going to have some questions about that in a second.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
Oh, no. Well, it's certainly interesting. It really ties in with some things I want to talk about you know, UK films and the industry that exists here. But if we just broaden it out a little bit before that, the topic of this evening is the idea of concept to cinema, which Zygi, I think is quite relevant to, in fact, what led you to get into film initially. As I understand it, your interest began because you realized that there were some films with incredible concepts that struggled to make it to screen due to poor marketing. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, it was a sort of a multitude of reasons why I wanted. I mean, I love film fundamentally. I think you have to love what you do, and I wanted to find a way to get into the film industry. I didn't see myself as a writer or director. But I did find that in sort of growing up and watching movies endlessly, you'd always find these great movies you discover at the time that you go, why wasn't that more noticed? Why wasn't it more available? And I'm sure we've all been there and seen this film and go, wow, what a great movie, never heard of it before. And so really kind of I came at it from a marketing distribution background to sort of work out how was it that you could get films that were really good ideas or concepts, good scripts, good stories, but weren't presented to audiences well enough. So my first business, Redbus, was exactly that. It was a marketing and distribution company where our job was to put money into films, to market and distribute them. That led to eventually co-producing films and producing films. But it was very much on the basis of not just the making of them, how do we get as many people and as many audiences to see the film as possible.
Brilliant. So less the idea of concept to script, but more getting a good film out to the people that deserve to be seeing it.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So, I mean, as I introduced at the beginning, I have done far less smaller films than yours. But my understanding is that there's a really procedural, sequential process in the development of films from initial concept to appearing on our screens. And Hazel, because perhaps your involvement in the independent film world means that you are more directly involved in all the different stages of that. How do you work to ensure that each stage in production is so curated that it reaches the good quality that you need it to be?
Yeah, I think when you're just starting out, you end up doing like a little bit of everything, mostly because you're the biggest driver of your project. But personally, I try to like compartmentalize each of the roles. So I write it, and then like maybe I'm involved in pre-production, and then the directing, and then the editing. But once we're on set, once we're working with the actors, the producer can kind of take over, and then you can focus on like what the task at hand, I guess. But I think like because my work tends to be pretty personal, even though it's like a lot to be involved at every stage, I want to, because I want the stories to be super specific.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's interesting actually, because Doublespeak, your film, focuses on some very difficult issues, and namely sexual assault in the workplace, an experience that I'm sure will resonate with many people here, though which sadly is probably the case. So do you think that film can change people's attitudes or create social change? And do you want it to? Do you want yours to?
I think when I decided to make the project and sort of got into it, that wasn't like the aim. But I think it's interesting because the film industry has typically been more male dominated. So as soon as you see like a woman and like women's experiences on screen, it feels a little like it has to be social change. But I don't think that wasn't necessarily the aim going into it. And I think like maybe women will watch the film and they'll see their experience more, and for male viewers it might feel like it's more drawing attention to the issue. But either way, I think more generally like diverse representation on screen and within the film industry as a whole is like the way to create change through filmmaking.
Absolutely, yeah. And Zygi, that kind of resonates a little bit with your wonderful film, Bend It Like Beckham. So for those who haven't seen it, it's about a female football team. And is it true that David Beckham was keen to be involved because he and you both saw that an opportunity to promote diversity, not just on screen, but also in football, by promoting female footballers there? And would you agree with Hazel's attitudes towards how films can create social change?
Yeah, I think if I tackle the first part of your question, we were keen to sort of find a football. It actually wasn't we didn't have a footballer in mind initially. It was written about the passion of a girl wanting to play football, and both her family and everyone else saying, "You're crazy, that's absurd." Particularly a very old-fashioned regimented Indian family, which is based obviously. And it was actually the director and I came across Beckham at an event, and she, a lady called Gurinder Chadha, managed to get hold of him and convince him that it was such a good thing for girls football, and he loved that idea. He'd already set up some of the young Beckham academies, even though this was 20 years ago. He's a big supporter of youth football, and he loved the idea absolutely, and said, and he even admits it to this day, he was quite flattered that we actually asked him anyway to use his name. We were just delighted that he would even consider us, letting him have his name, and the rest is history. So yeah, no, it was a big positive. And actually, you know, ironically, he went to America shortly after that. If you know, follow David Beckham's footballing career, and actually the film ended up helping him in America, as he often has said in interviews to this day, which is always a nice full circle. But I think as far as social change is concerned, I think, you know, film is such a powerful medium. It's seen by all of us. You know, I mean, last year we're all stuck at home watching every film we can get hold of on Netflix and Amazon and so on. And films have such a long life. You know, Bend It Like Beckham was a huge success 20 years ago, but there are people still watching it in their millions today. Every time it's on TV, it gets 1 million, 2 million viewers. And so already with that audience, you have such an ability to be able to, you know, impart a message as part. I mean, we want our films to be entertaining, but there's nothing wrong with having drama and stories that deal with subject matters that are challenging, that bring those subjects to the attention of the audience. And I think that's an amazing part of what we do. You can achieve both, and that's fantastic.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I've always been kind of in awe of the film industry and how it both takes so long to create a film, but it still is always managing to be so relevant and always one step ahead of us in this social change game. On the topic of Bend It Like Beckham, it was not only the first big break for Keira Knightley, but it was a British film, which is something that is quite close to your heart, Zygi, if I'm correct. Can you talk to us about how it, you know, the role of the embracing of the British film in that, and how it came about, specifically Bend It Like Beckham, then we can go a bit more general.
No, sure. I mean, I think what we wanted to do, because it sounds obvious, but because I was based in Britain, my partner and I had formed this company, Redbus, we wanted to do, you know, we did invest and work on American films, but we wanted to do something different. And what was interesting, coming back to my earlier point about marketing, whenever we did research on audiences or what they wanted to see, British films come up still today, the last 20 years, they come up really highly. Audiences want to see films about themselves they can relate to, they can see the cities that they live in, they see the town, the culture that they live every day. And I think the British film industry has gone through different periods over the last 30 years. You know, in the 80s, there were a lot of very dark, bleak dramas. We wanted to, you know, again, nothing wrong with that. Some of them from great filmmakers like Mike Leigh, Ken Loach, I love to this day. But we wanted to have a brighter, more positive and feel-good attitude about all our films. And so that's really where Bend It Like Beckham came along, really, about something that was so inspiring. Follow your dreams. Doesn't matter what the obstacles. Doesn't matter how absurd. And there was another film that came out around that time that I love, called Billy Elliot, which I'm sure hopefully many of you have seen. It was the same idea about a boy who wants to do ballet. You know, that notion of opposing elements that you don't suspect, whereas the girl should have done ballet and the boy should have done football in a very traditional environment. And that you know, we love the idea of promoting alternatives to that, and that's why, obviously, one of the reasons why it was so successful, I think. But from the basis of that, you know, I think we always wanted to carry on that promotion of British films. And in the end, we ended up selling our business to an American firm, Lionsgate, which is terrific, because as part of that partnership with Lionsgate, we ended up having, you know, amazing movies. You mentioned some of them: Hunger Games, La La Land, John Wick, Expendables. There was so many great American films, but I love doing something locally. And so over the years, we supported loads of filmmakers, British films, independent films, have worked and had the good fortune of working with, you know, a huge amount of fantastic writers, directors, and all British, all the way through the crew, and have had a lot of acclaim with some of the smaller British films we've done that have gone on to win Oscars and win BAFTAs and become commercial successes. And so that's very much my intention to carry on, which is in part one of many reasons why I partnered with Matthew Vaughn, who himself, having looked, you know, Matthew Vaughn, if you didn't know, created Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch, Layer Cake, Kingsman. They all had a Britishness to them. So I think at the moment we're hoping it's a kind of marriage of love of British cinema that we can carry on making.
That's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose actually very helpful, given the fact that travel doesn't work so well right now. Hazel, you're actually in the US, aren't you? So do you see a difference between the film industry in the US and here? People say that LA and New York are big centers for film, and that possibly doesn't exist in the same realm here. What are your thoughts?
I think LA feels like, I don't know, blockbuster movie world. Like New York is maybe kind of like more indie land, but to me, like London feels, just like Zygi was saying, like London feels like the place where like young British filmmakers can get their first films made. There's like a clearer path. Certainly helps that there's government funding for the arts in the UK, which does not exist in the US. And so for me, as I'm like moving towards making my first feature, it feels more like it'll be UK based as opposed to US, even though I am currently living here.
So do you think there might be a move back for you?
I think so. I think so. Yeah, that's the plan as soon as I wrap up my MFA.
Wonderful. So what was the process for you for creating Doublespeak? You say that you wrote it at school. How did you find developing that? To clarify, school being current school, not Highgate School. Yes? Yeah,
not Highgate.
How did you find the process of developing that in the US where funding, there isn't the funding and there isn't that clear route, as you mentioned?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's very much a student film. I made it in my first year at Columbia with my classmates and then crew that I had worked with previously before going to school. And so the budget was tiny, and it's amazing that it's like gone on to have this life, but it certainly like wasn't really the intention of it was coursework. So yeah, I developed the script over like 6 months in my first year at Columbia, shot it over the summer, took about a year to edit it, and then, which is too long, but I was in school still. And yeah, now it's like out in the world.
Do you think it might have been a slightly different film if it had been created in the UK, or perhaps not?
I think maybe it would have been different in that because I started my career in New York, I have resources there that I can draw on, but I think certainly a similar film could be made in the UK in a similar way. Just wasn't the position I was in at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple of small questions just for a bit of fun before we come back to some bigger, more conceptual ideas. Personal tastes, influences. Hazel, while we're on Doublespeak, were there any inspirational films that work for you, or directors or writing styles that have really driven you?
Yeah, I think my favorite film, the film that made me want to make films, is Robert Bresson, Alizard Balthazar, because it was like one of the first films I saw that was sort of showed me you can make a compelling story about ordinary, like smaller dramas, like more ordinary relationships and interactions. But then more recently, I really love Joanna Hogg and The Souvenir. I mean, there are so many, but those are a few of mine.
Wonderful. Zygi, same question.
Yeah, well, I had 4 older sisters, and so they were always watching sort of films that I wasn't probably allowed to watch. I was too young, so I ended up growing up on all these great films from the 70s from Martin Scorsese, like Taxi Driver and The Godfather. And I remember I even films like The Omen, which to this day terrifies me. Just great character-led dramas and thrillers, and it's amazing that those filmmakers like Scorsese and Coppola sort of made movies for 40 years after that. Scorsese still as good as ever. So I love those sort of movies through that period of growing up, really, and that sort of led me to and I just devoured films through my whole childhood. That was my go-to thing, which is why sort of to then follow a career in something I love has just been a dream for me. And
during this career, have you ever, I mean, I'm sure you've met a huge number of people, but has there ever been one where you've gone, oh my God, have you ever been fully starstruck?
Yeah, a couple of times, definitely. I think because I mentioned Taxi Driver, I did a film with Robert De Niro, and he's just such an icon, and actually quite difficult to get to know initially, because I think he's quite guarded because of who he is, and I thought he didn't like me, so I was terrified for the whole first hour of our meeting. and ended up not saying a word, and actually we got to know each other relatively well, so it was fine. But that was, I remember, actually I think I was shaking as I first met him. Wow.
And Hazel, have you I don't know if you've had the opportunity to meet all the people in New York at the moment. If you have you been starstruck, or have you got someone in mind that if you were to meet them, you just don't know what you do?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I haven't worked with enough stars to have been starstruck, but I will keep you posted. But Scorsese, oh my gosh, yeah, totally. If I see him around New York, I would be very starstruck.
Have you seen anyone around New York? It feels, in my mind, they're just everywhere on every street corner.
I can't think of anyone, but I think you do, but you just maybe don't notice. I don't know. It's more low profile, I guess, than LA or.
No, that's true. That's true. Okay, some fun ones out the way, and now back to the conceptual ideas. So something that is a very current conversation in the TV world, that is all that I know, is the introduction of the online platforms and how on earth TV is going to keep up with that, especially British TV in the future. Hazel, you're comparatively early on in your career. How do you see your career progressing and the industry progressing in light of these new technologies such as Netflix, Apple TV, etc.?
I think it's pretty encouraging that what I see as some of the best things that are on TV or have recently come out are like Fleabag and I May Destroy You, are some of probably, I think, the best things that have been out, in the past few years. Generally though, I think there's always going to be like good, really great content and not so great content, and we are consuming so much content right now, if the pandemic has shown us anything. So hopefully there's room for everything, and like compelling and well done films and series will always be there. Hopefully there's always a demand.
Yeah, absolutely. Zygi, what about yourself? With this, your career spans, a long time now, and do you feel it's changing? I know that you've mentioned in the past that you think that there's going to be a move towards shorter, perhaps 10-minute serializations. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, look, I think that the industry is constantly changing, and as Hazel said, I think this year has just shown how, the streaming platforms have, oddly enough, benefited from the ability to show us as much content as we've been able to devour. But it's television, I think, is a great format. I think what's interesting about television is actually, and I agree, Hazel, shows like Fleabag, just extraordinary, kind of taken from Phoebe Waller-Bridge's one-woman show in Edinburgh and created into a TV show that can showcase really innovative drama. But also television makes big, huge drama as well, almost as expensive as movies nowadays. You've got the eventized type of drama, which is great. So I love the variety of television. That's something that you can't necessarily get as much in cinema. What it's done to cinema, however, is it's making it more eventized. And it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of debate this last year as we've been going through the pandemic. What's going to happen to the traditional cinema going public? Are we all going to be like, well, no, we're just going to watch it on the Netflix program or another program at home and not go? I believe, and we won't know yet for another 6 months at least, but I do believe there's an appetite for cinema. I think people love the night out occasion of going to cinema, but people's taste is going to be more discerning. You're going to pick the films that you absolutely want to see. I think certainly when I was growing up, you would just go to the cinema on a Friday night just because you would, because we had 4 channels and that was it. Now people go when there's content that you absolutely have to go and see, and you can only see it in the cinema. So there needs to be that exclusivity. And I think that's something that is going to make filmmakers change and adapt what they make for the cinema, because you're making for cinema, it's expensive. It's a night out, and you can see so much good content on Netflix. Do something different for the cinema than you can on a streaming service. That said, the only other comment I'd make is that what's also growing on the streaming services are movies going straight to their service. That's something that, if you think about it, didn't exist even 3 or 4 years ago. There was, it was really it started based on serialized shows on the streamers, Now you have movies, big and small, being available one-offs, and that's a good thing, because that's a great thing for filmmakers. We're seeing a huge amount of our partners and filmmakers, and as I said, I mentioned the film Tetris we're making with Taron Egerton. We're making that for Apple. That's going to go on Apple Plus at the end of this year. That's the first time, you know, either Matthew or I have made a film for a streamer, but it's a big budget sort of caper thriller set in the 1980s. And actually, as a theatrical movie for the cinema, it might have been a film that we may not have made. We may not have been able to get the finance together, but Apple came in and gave us a really decent budget to make it, to go straight on that platform. So any opportunity to give filmmakers, producers the opportunity to make the films is a good thing. So I think you've just got to cater for the right audience with what the film is.
Brilliant. I suppose it's in keeping with your initial idea of getting the content out to the audience.
Definitely, definitely.
Perfect. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Those are the end of my questions. Oh, no, it's not. I've got one more, which is another fun one. Just what's your best piece of advice for any potential writers, producers, directors that might be watching this right now? And then we'll move on to some questions from the audience. Hazel, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think this is like a classic, but write what you know, or at least rooted in emotions that you know well, and be specific, because I think it's always more compelling.
Sorry, what do you mean by be specific?
Like specific in your writing and specific in the directing. The more, I find like somehow the more targeted it is, the more applicable it feels. Like if it's general, if an emotion is general, it never lands properly. Whereas if it's really specific, somehow it feels more relatable, I think.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And Zygi, do you have
yeah, I think I'd say sort of two general things. And I think, because the industry gets, and filmmakers get into a habit of trying to copy. And I think that's really a bad direction to go in. Be original. You know, you have so many people saying, oh, well, the last film was this film last year, I'm going to make another one. It's like that one last year, but I'm going to make it different. Be as original as you can. There's no problem, you know, as I think it was Shakespeare who said, there are only 7 stories that you just rotate in different forms. But actually, the more original you can be, the better the chance you have of succeeding, being different, original. And then the only other one, which sorry, sounds awfully cliched, is, but I believe it, and I mentioned it, made like Beckham, is sort of do follow your passion, your dream. Believe in yourself, follow it, because there's everyone gets no's all the time, and doesn't mean that it's not going to be a success in the end. So many movies that I've ended up doing have taken 10 years to get to the screen, and there was someone behind the movie, a filmmaker, a writer, a director, someone passionate, who had that dogged determination to not to give up. And those films have gone on to win Oscars and huge critical acclaim purely by that determination. So yeah, so that would be my two pieces of advice. That's
lovely, brilliant. Okay, I'll turn to some questions from the audience now. If anyone does have any additional questions, please do put them in the Q&A chat. Okay, so from Scarlett, Hazel said there's a clear pathway for British filmmakers. Could you elaborate on what that is? That's, I think, initially to Hazel, or also to Zygi.
Yeah, clearer, I guess, is a better. I don't think it's ever. There's so many different ways to make a movie, but to me, just from my own, Zygi can probably speak more generally to this, but it feels like there's a pathway through British government funding combined with broadcasters or distributors, in which first-time filmmakers and filmmakers in general, but particularly first-time filmmakers, can sort of get their films made in a way that just doesn't exist in America. Zygi, maybe you can add.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think the BFI, British Film Institute, is such a needed industry supporter, because I think it's funded by the government, and really puts a huge, many millions of pounds each year into development of projects, the support of new filmmakers, the support of diverse filmmakers. It puts a lot of money into first-time filmmakers, much more than any other organisation in the country. So that doesn't exist in the United States. And I think the BFI is a good port of call for any young filmmaker wanting to sort of get their projects recognized or noticed. And then you've also got the British broadcasters, BBC Films and Channel 4, or Film 4 are also, and Film 4 have had, and BBC Films to be fair, have had a very long history of supporting films. And between BBC, Film 4 and the BFI, that doesn't exist anywhere else in many other countries. And I think that's definitely something that's quite unique to the UK.
Brilliant, perfect, Scarlett. I hope that answers your question. We have an anonymous question for Zygi, which is, I can't wait for Tetris. Could you tell us more about it? Yeah, sure. So the brief version is some of you may remember there was a video game called Tetris in the 1980s, and this is an entirely true story. It's set in the 1980s. It was created by a Russian software developer, and it involves the CIA, MI5, Robert Maxwell and his family. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He was a kind of Rupert Murdoch type who, again, real life story. And it involves stealing the rights to this and trying to sell it to Nintendo or Atari. And it's kind of a classic caper comedy, all set in the 1980s. So we're very excited by it. Brilliant. We have got a question from Sammy. How can a young filmmaker, perhaps Hazel, if you wouldn't mind starting us off on this one, how can a young filmmaker connect with people in the industry?
Well, it's an interesting time right now because nobody's in person. But I think, well, at least I found at Columbia and like kind of emerging into the industry, I guess it's like sometimes it's the people around you are some of your best collaborators, like for the future. So having writers groups with friends has been super useful for me. But then then stuff like this and reaching out to sort of everybody you know, asking for general meetings and stuff post Sundance. So I guess because we're all home, you can Zoom with everyone. So I'm ending up having meetings with people in LA or whatever that I would never. I'm in New York, so I wouldn't usually meet with them like that. So there's something, feels a little more accessible, if a little further. So I think just like, yeah, draw from your whole like Rolodex, like everybody you know, I think is one of the best ways to start.
Just on that, do you think that it was key, or in general, it might be key to have work that you've created? Do you think it's important to just create so you can go out there with it? Or do you think it's there's space to create a network before you begin?
I think if you're starting out and you definitely want to work in film, like PAing on sets or figuring out any way you can sort of get involved at the very early stages. If you're working on film school projects that might end up having a nice life, when there's no budget and everybody just needs help, is a good way to start before you start making your own work. But of course, like once you have projects and once they're getting traction, that sort of thing is always going to be easier, and then you have something to talk about. So it's great to get the meeting, but then you have to like, you know, pitch something. I've written a script, or like, you know, figure out what to say next, I guess.
Absolutely. Okay. So we've got Robin Goodfellow, who, Zygi, I believe you know. Question is, are you missing golf? And do you think that Netflix influences concept and marketing?
Yes, I'm very missing golf, Robin. I look forward to seeing you next time on Highgate Golf Course at some point. But yeah, on the Netflix influencing concepts. I mean, look, I think what's interesting about the streamers actually is when we talk to them, it's slightly frightening how much data they have, because as we know, they're all algorithm led and they're all data led. And when we release a film, you know, I mean, I could get research companies try and find out who watched Bend It Like Beckham as an example, but it would just be very general. It would be, you know, 30% were over 50 and 20% were under 16. They literally could tell you it's 2.8364 million watched this film at this age, and that data informs them on what they want to make next. So that's quite interesting, but also quite frightening that they know this information. And you know, it does mean though that when a film is a success, what they want actually is what I don't think is necessarily that good for the industry, is they want a copy. which is what I said you don't want to try and do. So when they have a success on something, and that's, by the way, why the industry, we make sequels ourselves at my company right now, but the industry is a little bit obsessed with sequels, because they go, well, it worked so well last time, we'll try and do something different, make it bigger and get some more stars. And that's why every year you just see brands coming up again, whether it's Jurassic World 3 or they're making Top Gun again this year, and all these movies that have been made and then digging them out again. And I think that's a shame, but they're doing it because we, the audience, are watching them. So it's a sort of slightly vicious circle. It's hard to get out of that. But coming back to Robin, your question, Netflix are being very specific on concepts that they want to make next, based on what they've seen their audiences have watched in the past. And so that, whether it's a good or bad thing, that's what they're doing.
That's very interesting, actually. Do you think there's because of the demographic, the clarity of the demographic watching, do you think it will also result in a greater disparity between film genres, perhaps? Or do you think it might embrace the new and the creative because they want as many people to watch it as possible? Yeah,
I mean, I think it can go both ways. I think what's interesting is that if you look at what's been successful this last year, okay, there was a show, whether you like it or not, called The Queen's Gambit, which hopefully you're seeing. It's a terrific show. That took something like 15 years to try and get made. And Netflix literally made it reluctantly because there was a deal they had with the filmmaker, and they were like, okay, fine. And if you think about it, it was Anya Taylor-Joy, does a great performance in it, not a well-known actress, period, about chess. I mean, there are all the reasons why, as an executive, I said, no chance, we're not making this, because no one's going to bother seeing it. It was one of the highest rated shows last year. Why? Because it was original and it was just good, right? And I think that's sort of counter to sort of kind of the way of the algorithm way of doing things, is that, and that comes back to my point, is when you're original, sometimes you can find an audience. But I think that's great about the streamers. That's what's fantastic. It can still offer variety. It can still take gambles. And movies and TV shows can still break out.
Brilliant, thank you. For Hazel, do you ever get writer's block? And for Zygi, how much influence does the writer have, especially when larger companies take over? Hazel, do you like to start?
Yes, of course. But I think I try to just, if you can write 2 pages every morning, you can get a script done eventually. I don't know, you just have to be diligent about it, because if you think about it too much, you'll never write anything.
Very lovely. Zygi, do you think the writer has influence, and what does that look like when a big company takes over?
Yeah, no, look, I think the writer is actually still very powerful in the business. I think in television, they're regarded even more powerful than the director. In film, the director is the king. In television, is the writer. And I think that's a good thing. I do hope that carries on. I think they know that without the writer, it's become so organized that now it's not just one writer anymore on a TV show. You can have like 7, 8 writers on one single TV show, but that can sometimes work great. We've been in those situations myself, where they call it a writer's room, where you've got 4 or 5 great writers almost bouncing ideas off each other for weeks and months on end. And that's an amazing creative process. And so, yeah, no, they're still incredibly important to everything, because at the end of the day, there's the underlying basis of every single movie and TV show is the script.
Absolutely. We have got a question from Andrew Plaisted. Do you think that schools do enough to promote creative industries like film? Yes, sorry, that's one question. Do you think schools do enough to promote the creative industries?
You want to go first on that one? You were there more recently.
Yeah, and actually, Andrew Plaisted taught me English, and I'm working on a script that uses this book, this play Arcadia, that I'm pretty sure he taught in our class. I don't know. I don't at the time. I think no, maybe, but I think there is. I mean, I left school 10 years ago, so I don't. It's still a long time. I think there's more of a push towards creative industries, and I think there should be, because I think when I left school, it was like you were like a doctor, a lawyer, a banker, and I thought I thought I'd do one of those, and obviously didn't, and it wouldn't have been right. So I think I sort of found my own way into it, but it seems like from what even stuff like this, it's like there's more awareness that you can that's a career, that's a possibility, which I think is amazing.
And Zygi, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think it is changing. I think it is still underserved as a potential career choice. You know, I think going back when I was younger, I think it was looked at as a dirty word to try and go into the film industry. You know, film industry and acting. You know, you'll never make any money or a job doing that. And that's definitely changed. But there's always more that can be done. Always is. I think also it'd be good to see, and I've talked about this at other. I talked quite a few sort of sixth form talks about encouraging young filmmakers to not just think, or young people interested in the film industry, not just to think about writing, directing. You know, there's so many other jobs in film. You know, everyone seems to focus very much on the physical, the actual creative part of it, but the physical side of it is as significant. You know, you have crew members, producers, crew. You know, we hire 400 people working on our big movies. You know, and they're not all. There's only one writer and one director on a movie, but there's 398 other people working on it. That's a career, and that's an industry. You know, the creative industries as a whole now, it's been in the newspaper the last 6 months, is one of the biggest contributors to the economy today across the entire creative industries, and that includes everything from fashion and music as well, of course. But it's a massive business, and that's something that I don't think generally schools look at. They look at it as the creative about studying it in the form of English and writing, which of course is inherently important, but actually there's so much more to it.
Absolutely, yeah. We have a question about soundtracks. How important are soundtracks to films, and how much of a percentage do they take?
I'll take my part on that one. I mean, they don't take a percentage. The way they typically work is you can do deals on soundtracks where actually they give you money to put into your movie in exchange for them taking the soundtrack. So it all depends on, and then also depends on, there's so many different deals. I could talk for a long time about this, so I won't bore you all, but it also depends on if you want a very, very expensive song in your movie, you can do a deal with the publishing company where you give them the soundtrack right in exchange for that song. So it's a negotiation is the short answer to that you can always try and, you know, always aim for. I mean, I think soundtrack is incredibly important. Sure, we've seen it in all the movies, you know, the soundtrack can make or break a film. Therefore always aspire to have the best songs on there, but there's lots of different ways of achieving that without it costing you too much money.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, Hazel, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, because it's music is so expensive, and I think personally for me, I found with my I couldn't have afforded any of the music that I would have wanted to put in my short. So I worked with a really amazing composer who built a soundscape for the film. So rather than like having a track that I couldn't afford, we made a sound that served the project really well. So I think, yeah, I mean, the audio is just as important as the visual, I would say.
That's amazing to make a whole soundscape for it. Could you tell us a little bit about the process of that?
Yeah, so the editor, I and the editor kind of worked together to like lay in some stuff, and then honestly we just sent it to a really amazing composer who made it 10 times better than I could have ever done, using a lot of the sound that we had recorded on set, and so we didn't have to add, there was no music, but we sort of manipulated it to create like a bed for the dialogue and stuff.
Amazing. Hazel, this is also to you, I think, primarily, from Anthony Crittenden. Is an MFA the best route to break through into the industry? And where would be best to study it, the US or the UK?
I don't know if it's the best. It's definitely a path. I think there's so many different ways. For me, because I was working as an editor before, and more in a commercial space, it felt like the way to make the jump into directing. And also I think like just having the space to like fail basically and make really bad work because you're in school and you can like experiment and have the time. I certainly wouldn't have been able to write in the same way that I have been at school when I was like working full time. But it's hugely expensive, and I think it's like a very specific choice, especially in America. But then BAFTA does scholarships for UK students who want to study in US universities. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend looking down that route. I mean, I've really loved it and recommend it highly, but it is a specific choice and it's not the only way in.
Zygi, do you find that many people you work with have come from a background with, you know, having studied film, or not so much?
Yeah, no, I think they have. I think there's I spotted actually a couple of questions that popped up. They seem to be coming up on my screen in different places. So I'm trying to keep up with some of them as well, about what I'd advise kind of people to do, and do you go into sort of postgrad course, and another one I think is asked, if you're not doing film in university, how do you get into it afterwards? You know, I didn't do film at all. I did business, a business studies degree. And actually, you know, the harder way is not to do sort of a postgrad course. I'd absolutely recommend, whether it's writing or directing or in creative or in acting, going to postgrad course. I thoroughly recommend that, because the organizations doing it do then not only more of these kind of events. This is done through Highgate School as sixth form, but so many of the postgrad courses do different events. One of the best out there is the National Film and Theatre School, the NFTS. And at the moment, we you know, they approached us actually 6 months ago with their writers course. There's 10 writers, and in the end, we ended up doing a competition with them to write a spec script for us. One of them was so good, we optioned it and paid them thousands of pounds for it. You know, that access to our business and to us we can't do it with everybody, but we'll do it with the NFTS, we'll do it with organizations. So I think any opportunity to follow sort of some kind of postgrad or career choice through education is far better. Going at it alone is really tough and very difficult. So yeah, the more you can do that, the better.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, I think that was James Rogers who asked that. Is that what you were looking at?
Yeah, that was the one that came up, and I saw an early one that I then scrolled up earlier about how he got into it by not being in film at university.
Yeah. So we have a question from Julie Welsh, which is a bit of a fun one. It was meant for all three of us. I don't know that I'm going to get involved in it. What movie character would best describe you? Zygi?
Oh wow. Hazel, if you know the answer to that, you can go first. Trying to think.
I don't know. That's a hard one.
It's a hard one.
That's a really hard question. We might enjoy it. Give us some time. We might come back to that one. Let's go for another question, and then we'll come back to the one at the end.
Yeah,
I was going to say anything. I'd have to be some sort of like round-faced Disney cartoon character. Don't know which one. Hazel and Zygi, we'll come back to that one. We've got a question about the fact that you loved sport, Zygi. Is that where Bend It Like Beckham came from? And perhaps we could widen that to a larger question about, do you follow in films what, you know?
Well, ironically, since Bend It Like Beckham, I've done two other more recent sporting movies. I did a film called Eddie the Eagle, which was Hugh Jackman and Taron Egerton about ski jumping. And then a year and a half ago, I did a film called Fighting with My Family, which was Florence Pugh, about a girl who wanted to do wrestling with The Rock and Vince Vaughn. So it's not, I mean, I do love sport, but it was more what I like is that notion. I mentioned it also in Billy Elliot. It's that notion of characters doing not what they are expected of them. You know, I think we sometimes live in a very regimented society, and I love that idea of characters and go, you know what, I don't care what I'm meant to do. I want to follow my passion. So that's really where Bend It Like Beckham and ideas like that came from.
Absolutely. I think this to both, do you think enough is being done to promote diversity in the film industry, in particular with regards to people of different ethnicities? Hazel, you were talking about this earlier.
Yeah, I think there's been a start, and I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think, yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, like representation, both like within the industry, but also on screen is super important for both across gender lines and in terms of all kinds of diversity. And I think there's definitely there's a move towards that, and there's more awareness, particularly in the US. I think after Black Lives Matter this summer, I'm definitely noticing that there's more of a push towards diversity and representation. But I think it's like there's so much more to be done, and yeah, hopefully I think it's going to keep moving in the right direction.
Perfect. Zygi, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think organisations like the BFI are really positive for that, for encouraging diversity. It's they really push it but it's, as Hazel said, we're only dipping our toe in the ocean of what we could do. I think so much more could be done. I think it has changed a lot in the last year or two already, and to Hazel's point, the Black Lives Matter movement definitely helped that as well. But it's certainly not enough yet.
Absolutely. Okay, we have a final question, which I think covers two of them. I'll read them both out, and so we can try and cover both. The first one is from Alexander Belliano, I hope I pronounced that right. To Zygi, while streaming services allows you to make a film you wouldn't otherwise have made, do things like the HBO Max Warner Bros. Controversy concern you going forward? And the second is pretty similar. Does the HBO Max Warner Bros. Controversy concern you going forward? / is art being compromised by the lure of funding from big companies?
Yeah, well, so I'll give some background to those who don't know what the HBO Max Warner Bros. Controversy is, just to clarify for everyone. So basically, Warner Brothers, which I'm sure you know, who make everything from Harry Potter and DC Comics and Batman and so on, they own a streaming service called HBO Max. And they decided to put all their movies this year, led primarily by the pandemic, straight onto HBO Max and not in cinema. That goes on to the right till December. And so there's been a lot of controversy about it because they did it without telling filmmakers, and all these filmmakers have put their movies out to be made for the cinema. Now, in the middle of the pandemic, cinemas are shut. Their logic was, we can't get to you in cinemas, but they chose a kind of quite a dramatic position and saying everything in 2021 is going to go out to a streaming service. And I mean, I think it's a temporary situation because of this crisis that we've all faced the last 12 months due to the pandemic. I don't think it would have happened were it not for that. Cinemas are open, so a lot of these big movies, they deserve a cinema release, and I think they will go back to that. I think Warner Brothers has admitted that. But they are also all owned by, Warner Brothers is owned by AT&T, which is, the equivalent of British Telecom in the United States. It's a huge telecoms company. Universal is owned by Comcast, another huge telecoms company. They all have a different reason for owning these content businesses, and there is a risk they all end up putting their content straight on the services. As I said earlier, I think if it's for the right piece of content, that's fine. I think if you go for certain films, they deserve to be on the big screen, and I still think nothing replaces that communal experience of sitting with 200 other people and watching a film in the cinema. I think that's such a unique experience that you'll never replace on a streaming service, however big your TV gets. It'll never be the same. And yeah, so long live cinema as far as I'm concerned.
Brilliant. Hazel, do you have anything to add to that? The idea of streaming services allowing you to make things you wouldn't otherwise have made? I know that that hasn't happened yet, but do you see there's a potential in that for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. At Sundance this year, the Apple TV broke the record for Coda. They bought this feature for $25 million, and that's an independent movie. So certainly there's it's a huge supporter of indies, and I mean that's a very specific film, and it definitely makes sense. You can see why they bought it. But I think, like Zygi said, I make a movie, hopefully, so a bunch of an audience watches it together in a theater, and then eventually, sure, I would love as many people to see it as possible, but you want to see it on the big screen first, maybe, and hopefully we can continue doing that. And there's a combination of the two that will allow as many people to see the movie and the access to it, but still preserve the way that movies were designed to be watched.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the end of our questions today. I'm afraid we have gone over, unless you guys have got an answer to that movie character question from Julie Welch.
Oh, I did say I'd come back to it. I regret that now. I can't think of one. Hazel?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, let me know, Dr. Welch, if they think of anything. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to Zygi and Hazel. That was really, really, really interesting. I have enjoyed all of this. I'm sorry to the questions we didn't get a chance to answer. And yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Stuart Evans now.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, everybody. Just a couple of things from me, really. I mean, what a fascinating evening. We had our own drama playing out before us before the event. So thank you for bearing with us, everybody, with the delay. But I'm sure you'll agree it was certainly well worth the wait. So much great advice for any budding creatives out there. and for the rest of us as well, a real insight into such a fascinating world. Thanks for giving up your time. It was such a wonderful evening, and we hope, for a shameless plug as well, which we've got on there, we hope that many of you can attend our next events also. But finally, thank you to Charlotte, to Zygi, to Hazel, from all of us in the audience here, and on behalf of the OC creative section as well, for such a fantastic evening. It's been really great fun. Okay, enjoy the rest of the evening, everyone, and catch up with you soon, hopefully. Bye bye.